Now, our next speaker is the inestimable Pat Kelly, who's a recent member of Labour for Independence, and I think for a long time though has been utterly convinced of the need for independence for Scotland. He's a former Scottish Secretary of PCS. He's also the former STUC President. He's been a Labour Party member and a very long time activist for the Labour Party. And this is his first time speaking for the referendum debate. So if you would all give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Deborah. It's not only the first time I've spoken in public during the referendum debate, it's the first time I've spoken or addressed a political gathering since Tony Blair took us into the Iraq War. That decision, that disastrous decision, ripped the heart out of the Labour Party, and it left thousands of people like myself bitterly disillusioned. Many of my close friends left the party at the time, but I remained a member. I should say I clung on to my membership. I clung on in the belief or the hope that things would change. But I think the only way I can see change happening in the Labour Party is if there is a vote for independence on the 18th of September. And once the Labour Party in Scotland is released from that straitjacket of London headquarters control, then there is the prospect that we may begin to rediscover the moral compass that we've lost. I've not always been a supporter of independence, although probably since it was announced I've been a supporter. During my time on the STUC General Council, the trade union movement was in the forefront of the fight for a Scottish Parliament. The executive of the campaign for a Scottish Parliament used to meet in my office in Edinburgh. That was their headquarters. I was on the steering committee that drafted the Claim of Right for Scotland document. That was the one that gave birth to the Constitutional Convention, without which there would have been no Scottish Parliament. So I was very much a devolution man. That's the way I saw things forward. I didn't think in those days about independence. I just thought of a Scottish Parliament being the solution to many of our problems. And when you think of that Scottish Parliament, some of its achievements have been very impressive. The care for the elderly package, the abolition of university tuition fees, the free bus travel, the free prescriptions, the end of the sale of council houses, the land reform legislation. All governments have contributed to these fine achievements. But these achievements have been made despite the limited powers of the Scottish Parliament. When you consider that we're only relying on a block grant for Westminster, think what could be done if a Scottish Parliament had all the powers, all the tax and revenue raising powers. By that I mean income tax, VAT, the excise duty, corporation tax, capital gains tax, oil revenue tax, all of these taxes, all of that revenue. Think what those powers would mean to us and the difference they would make. The implementation of the social policies that properly reflect our values would actually be able to be implemented. My decision to support independence was not based on a reaction to the present nasty Tory-led government or the increasingly pessimistic chances of a Labour victory at the next election. I think the UK's problems are deeper, they go back much further, and in my opinion they look set to continue. When Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, she broke the post-war consensus that had committed governments, both Tory and Labour, to a set of policies which meant full employment, the public ownership of our utilities and other key industries, and a programme for the building of council houses. However, in the election in 1979, the Tories won only 22 out of 71 seats in Scotland, with only 30% of the vote. For the next 18 years of Tory rule, markets were deregulated, nationalised industries were privatised, and council houses were sold. And during that period, the Tory vote in Scotland progressively collapsed until they became virtually a fringe party. But in England, its values were accepted, and Labour was unable to make any inroads. To make the Labour Party more electable and more acceptable to the voters of Middle England, it embarked on the New Labour project. Now, at first we weren't sure what it meant, and we were full of hope. And the first government gave us a minimum wage, it gave us the Human Rights Act, it gave us the Good Friday Agreement for Northern Ireland, and of course it gave us the Scottish Parliament, without which we wouldn't be here debating this issue. So we have to congratulate that first Labour government for some of the moves that it made, some of the legislation it produced. But then it introduced university tuition fees. Then it went even further than the Tories with bank deregulation. It continued the privatisation programme, mainly through PFI, Private Financial Initiative programmes. And it became virtually the only way that you could build a public sector project. And worst of all, in my opinion, at the end of New Labour's reign, inequality in Britain was amongst the worst in the developed world. And we had the highest rate of poverty in Western Europe. And that's a terrible indictment for 13 years of a Labour government. Labour's leaflet on the referendum, which was posted through every door, and I'm sure you gave it a cursory glance, tells us that Labour will build a new economy which is driven by Labour values of equality, solidarity and social justice. Now, these, as we know, those of us who are either in the Labour Party or were in it at some point or have voted for it, these are indeed core Labour values. But the party has drifted away from those core values a long time ago, and I believe it's to woo the voters in the marginal seats in the south of England. According to John Prudis, who is the head of Labour's policy review, the present head of the review that's taking place just now, Labour are creating cynical policies whose only purpose is to chime with focus groups. And I can assure you that none of those focus groups are here in Scotland at all in those marginal seats in the south. Recently, Tristan Osborne, who's a Labour candidate in a Kent marginal, and I know something about the Kent area through some friends, he put it succinctly when he argued that Labour had to target the aspirational southern voter. That is where you win elections. Now, in this part of Britain, the centre of gravity of political debate is moving further and further to the right. And as a result, Labour promises to be tougher than the Tories on benefit cuts, on immigration and on public spending. Now, by contrast, the situation here in Scotland is quite different. We have a left of centre majority. The competition, the political competition is between the Labour Party and the SNP, which are basically two social democratic parties. They often try to outflank each other on the left. For example, when Ed Miliband visits Scotland, he digs out what constitutes Labour's most left-wing policies. The 50 pence higher tax rate, the energy price freeze, the promises on 0 hours contracts, and he condemns the SNP, quite correctly, for their policy on the corporation tax. Now that's fine, and I fully welcome that competition to prove who's more to the left, because when Miliband comes here, he's trying to woo our voters. But meanwhile, back down south, the Labour Party advocates cuts in benefits for the young unemployed and tax breaks for business. Who do they think they're kidding? Do they think we don't notice these things? And they adopt these different approaches to the two different countries, and at the same time ask us to believe that there's no difference in the values between Scotland and England. Throughout the course of the referendum debate, Better Together's strategy has been to equate support for independence as an endorsement of the SNP. Even my own daughter has bought into that myth, or she did before. before I put her up against the wall. She told me she didn't trust the SNP or Alex Salmond and therefore wasn't sure about independence. I told her that she should listen to the strength of the argument and not on who's making the argument, that this vote is not a vote about the SNP, that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to shape the country and we should grasp it with both hands. Independence is not an end in itself. It's a means of controlling our destiny and building a fairer Scotland. What government we have after that is entirely in our own hands. Now, I believe that Labour will eventually be in the driving seat of Scottish politics, provided they go back to their founding principles. A transformed Labour Party, free of Westminster control and free from the constraints of Middle England, could begin a race to the top instead of a race to the bottom. It could then put into practice its values of equality, solidarity and social justice. It could become a party that again campaigns for progressive taxation, wealth redistribution, the elimination of child poverty, decent affordable housing and the restoration of trade union rights. Thank you, David.
That's an important one.
Yeah. Scotland, as we know, as we've read, is a wealthy country, one of the richest in the world. We have a well-educated, highly skilled workforce. Our universities are amongst the best in the world. And we have an abundance of natural resources. We generate more tax per head of population than the rest of the UK. In short, we have everything required for success. Comrades, we're 2 months away from the biggest constitutional decision in the country's history, and can I finish by referring to the task ahead. Just about every newspaper in the country is opposed to independence. The No campaign have been given an additional £2.4 million from rich business donors, most of whom do not even live in Scotland. The campaign against us is based on fears and smears and sometimes downright lies. The 3 mainstream national parties are lined up against us. Westminster has even used the visits of leaders of foreign countries, including President Obama, to plea for a no vote. But despite everything that the British establishment has thrown at us, we're still in a position to win this referendum. Because I think what we have and they don't have is a mighty grassroots movement. In every town and every village in Scotland, there's meetings taking place, discussions taking place. And many people have been involved in politics for the first time, or like me, for the first time in many years. I believe we can win the referendum, but I would urge everybody here to ensure that when the polls close on the 18th of September, we can all look ourselves in the mirror and be satisfied with the fact that we have done everything humanly possible to bring about a victory that will make political history. Thank you.